Police insulted Immigrant thinking she was ordinary. What happened next will shock you. Hey you! Get out of the car now! Shouted Officer Johnson, banging hard on the window of the gray Honda Civic. His hands were already holstered, as if he were dealing with a dangerous criminal rather than a 34-year-old woman who had simply stopped to buy coffee. Marina Restrepo slowly turned off the engine, her hands visible on the steering wheel. 20 years living in the United States had taught her that sudden movements with police officers could be fatal, especially when her Colombian accent still echoed in every word she uttered. License to drive and documents. Fast. Johnson spat out the words with disdain, noting the small crucifix hanging from the rearview mirror and the work ID partially hidden under some papers on the dashboard. His eyes scanned the interior of the car like a predator looking for justification for what he was about to do. Marina handed over the documents with supernatural calm. Her eyes, however, caught something that Johnson didn't notice: 2 security cameras strategically positioned on the corner, and her own phone still recording the conversation she had started moments before the approach. 20 years of experience had taught her that evidence is more powerful than shouting. Marina Restrepo, Johnson pronounced the surname with exaggerated disdain, as if each syllable were a personal insult. Of course it is. Where did you really come from? Mexico? Guatemala? You're all the same. He laughed, showing the documents to his partner, Officer Davis, who was leaning against the car with an uncomfortable smile. The irony of the situation did not escape Marina. There she was, a woman who had dedicated 2 decades of her life to protecting this country, being treated as if she were a threat to national security for buying a coffee at 7 a.m. Her muscles remained relaxed, but her eyes revealed a dangerous serenity, the same one she had developed over years of facing situations much more tense than this one. I'm Colombian, officer. American citizen for 15 years, Marina replied, her calm voice contrasting with Johnson's growing aggression. Each word came out measured, controlled, as if she were following a script she knew by heart. Oh yeah? And what are you doing here so early? Selling drugs to school children. Johnson pointed to the elementary school across the street, where some children were beginning to arrive with their parents. I bet there's a lot of white powder in your car, isn't there? Marina closed her eyes for a moment, not out of fear, but to control something much more powerful that was growing inside her. How many times had she witnessed this same scene from different angles? How many operations had she led against corrupt police officers, just like Johnson? The difference was that this time, she was on the other side of the situation, and that would be his undoing. I'm going to need to search your vehicle, announced Johnson, already opening the back door without waiting for permission. I bet there's something interesting in here. You always do. His large, dirty hands began to rummage through Marina's personal belongings, throwing papers on the floor, unceremoniously opening her handbag. What Johnson didn't know was that Marina had memorized every word, every gesture, every breach of protocol. Her 15 years of experience had taught her that true strength sometimes needs to disguise itself as vulnerability in order to capture predators who hide behind shiny badges and inflated egos. Davis finally approached, clearly uncomfortable with the escalating situation. Johnson, man, maybe we should. She seems to be cooperating. Should what? Johnson turned aggressively to his partner, drops of saliva flying from his mouth. Let this illegal immigrant do what she wants in our city? No. Today she learns how things really work here. Marina watched everything in silence, but something in her gaze made Davis instinctively recoil. It was the same intensity that made criminals confess to crimes before she even asked the first question during interrogations. A calm that only exists in people who have seen the worst of humanity and have learned to turn it into power. Marina's phone vibrated discreetly, a message that would change the whole dynamic of that seemingly ordinary morning. She quickly read the screen and an almost imperceptible smile formed on her lips. Johnson was too busy humiliating her to realize that he had just dug his own professional grave. While Johnson dumped the entire contents of his bag on the hood of the car, searching for imaginary drugs, Marina maintained her dignified posture. She knew something that Johnson would soon discover. Some people carry silent storms, and when these storms finally manifest, they completely rewrite the reality of those who dared to underestimate them. You know what's funny? Johnson laughed out loud, beaming at the passers-by who were beginning to gather to watch the spectacle. You think you have rights here. That you're equal to us. But at the first opportunity, you show who you really are. Marina remained silent, but her hands discreetly adjusted the angle of the phone to better capture the audio. Every insult, every display of racism was being documented with surgical precision. Johnson had no idea that he was meticulously building the dossier of his own destruction. If you're enjoying this story of injustice that's about to be turned upside down, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because what Johnson was about to discover about Marina would change not only his career, but his entire perspective on who really controlled that situation from the very first second. Johnson wasn't content with just searching the car. His dirty hands began to dump the contents of Marina's bag on the wet hood, scattering her personal belongings as if they were garbage. Lipstick, wallet, keys, everything was dumped unceremoniously while he searched for something to justify his gratuitous aggression. How interesting, Johnson laughed out loud, holding up a small photo of Marina at her university graduation. You thought you could pass yourself off as someone polite, didn't you? I bet you bought that diploma on a street corner. He threw the photo on the floor and deliberately stomped on it, leaving the imprint of his boot on the smiling face of the young woman from 20 years ago. Davis approached nervously. Johnson, man, this is way out of line. She's done nothing but buy coffee. His voice trembled slightly as he saw the photo torn up on the asphalt. Crossed the line. Johnson turned around furiously. Are you defending this immigrant now? Maybe you need a lesson in loyalty too. His words came out like spittle, charged with a violence that made Davis instinctively recoil. Marina watched everything with a serenity that deeply disturbed Johnson. 20 years living in this country had taught her that men like him existed in every corner, every department, every position of power. But they had also taught her something much more valuable. Patience is the most lethal weapon there is. During her first years in the United States, Marina had cleaned office toilets while studying English at night. She had endured bosses who forgot to pay her overtime, colleagues who spoke deliberately incorrect Spanish to mock her, and clients who treated her as if she were invisible. Each humiliation had been carefully filed away in her memory, not out of bitterness, but out of determination. You know what I think? Johnson came dangerously close to Marina, invading her personal space. I think you came here to steal opportunities from real Americans. Parasites like you are the problem with this country. His stinky cigarette and stale coffee breath hit her face. Marina didn't flinch an inch. Her eyes met his with an intensity that made Johnson hesitate for a moment. It was the same look she had developed over 15 years of interrogating suspects, a mixture of compassion and absolute authority that disarmed even the most hardened criminals. You're going to learn to respect authority today, Johnson continued, trying to regain his bravado. I'm going to take you to the police station, and there you're going to find out how things work for people like you. He nodded to Davis. Cuff her. Davis hesitated, his hands shaking as he gripped the handcuffs. Johnson, no warrant, no probable cause. This could be a lot of trouble for us. Problem. Johnson exploded. The only problem here is that you spoil these people. She'll learn the hard way. He ripped the handcuffs from Davis's hands and headed towards Marina with furious strides. It was at that moment that Marina's phone rang. It was classical music, soft and elegant, completely out of place in that scene of urban brutality. Johnson stopped abruptly, as if the sound had hypnotized him. Marina looked at the screen and, for the first time since the approach began, spoke in a voice that carried a subtle but undeniable authority. I need to take this. It's urgent. Urgent. Johnson laughed hysterically. What part of your being arrested don't you understand? He reached forward to snatch the phone from her hands. Marina pushed the device away with a movement so fluid and professional that it made Davis arch his eyebrows. It was the kind of reflex that only develops after years of specific training. Officer Johnson, she said calmly, I recommend that you rethink your next actions carefully. Something in her tone made Johnson pause. For a second, the mask of racist superiority slipped, revealing a deeply insecure man who used the badge to compensate for decades of personal mediocrity. But the pause lasted only a second. Johnson grabbed Marina's arm hard enough to leave a mark. Don't tell me what to do, you. He started to utter a racial slur, but the words died in his throat when he saw the expression on her face. Marina showed no pain, fear, or anger. Instead, she smiled slightly, the same smile she wore when suspects thought they had found a loophole in their interrogations, unaware that they were digging their own graves. Davis finally found the courage to intervene. Johnson, stop. There are people filming. He pointed to 3 pedestrians who had stopped on the sidewalk, cell phones in hand, capturing the whole scene. Johnson looked around and realized that he had attracted a small crowd. His police paranoia finally awoke, but it was too late. The situation had escalated beyond any plausible justification. "Everybody get out of here," he shouted to the onlookers. "This is police business." But his words sounded desperate, not authoritative. Marina took advantage of the distraction to whisper something almost inaudible. 15 years, Johnson. 15 years I've waited for someone like you." Her words were so low that only he could hear. Johnson stared at her, confused and suddenly nervous. "What did you say?" But Marina had already returned to her silence, leaving only that enigmatic phrase echoing in his mind. The smile remained, small but unmistakable, as if she knew exactly how the next few minutes would unfold. What Johnson couldn't understand was why a simple immigrant made him feel like he was walking straight into a carefully prepared trap. Why were his survival instincts, dormant from years of unpunished abuse of power, finally awakening with a deafening alarm? Every insult uttered, every gesture of contempt, every breach of protocol was being meticulously documented not only by passers-by, but by someone who understood exactly the legal value of every second of that self-destructive performance. Marina's phone rang again, this time insistently. Johnson clenched his fist around her arm harder, leaving red marks on her pale skin. "Turn that shit off now." Marina looked straight into his eyes, unblinking. "It's my boss. If I don't answer, he'll come and find me himself." Her voice carried a certainty that made Johnson hesitate for a split second. "Your boss?" Johnson laughed bitterly. "What kind of boss could an immigrant like you have? The owner of the diner where you clean toilets?" Davis approached nervously, noticing that more people had stopped to watch the scene. "Johnson, man, there's a lot of people watching. Maybe we should." "Should what?" Johnson turned angrily to his partner. "Let this one challenge me in front of everyone? I'm not going to be disrespected by an immigrant." Marina took advantage of the distraction to discreetly accept the call and put the phone on speaker, low enough not to be obvious, but loud enough to capture clear audio. Years of experience had taught her that evidence is only valuable when it is irrefutable. "Marina? You're late for the meeting with the mayor. Did something happen?" The voice on the other end sounded clear and authoritative, with an accent that was definitely not a diner accent. Johnson frowned, confused. What meeting? What mayor? But his arrogance soon returned. "It doesn't matter. You'll explain it at the police station." What Johnson didn't realize was that Marina had positioned the phone so that the security cameras on the corner would capture not only the scene, but also the audio of the call. 15 years of investigating police corruption had taught her that technical details make the difference between dismissed cases and convictions. "Officer," Marina said calmly, "are you sure you want to continue with this? There's still time to reconsider your actions." Johnson exploded. "Reconsider? Who do you think you are to give me orders?" He pushed Marina against the car so hard that her head hit the hood with a dry sound that made Davis take a step back. It was at that moment that a black Toyota Camry pulled up across the street. The man who got out of the car wore a simple but well-cut suit, and his eyes immediately assessed the situation with the precision of someone used to crises. He didn't run, he didn't shout. He simply started walking towards them with the confidence of someone who has the authority to intervene. Marina saw the man approaching and for a second, just a second, she allowed a genuine smile to appear on her face. "Detective Rodriguez," she murmured quietly, but loud enough to be picked up by the still-connected phone. Johnson followed her gaze and saw the man approaching. "Hey, this is police business. Get back in your car." Detective Rodriguez discreetly showed Marina his ID, but kept it out of Johnson's sight. "Good morning, officers. Is everything all right here?" "Everything under control," Johnson replied aggressively. "We're arresting this one for contempt of court and suspicion of drug possession." Rodriguez arched his eyebrows. "Suspected drug possession? Based on what?" Davis finally found the voice to speak. "Actually, detective, we didn't find anything." "Shut up, Davis." Johnson growled. "We haven't found it yet, but we will at the police station." Rodriguez approached Marina with professional care. "Ma'am, are you hurt? Do you need medical assistance?" Marina discreetly touched the red mark on her arm where Johnson had grabbed her. "I'm fine, detective." Just documenting the procedure for my report. What report? Johnson laughed hysterically. You're going to write a report on your own arrest? Rodriguez looked at Marina with an expression that Johnson couldn't decipher. It was respect, but there was something more, as if he was watching a master in action. Ma'am, would you like me to call your supervisor to inform him of the situation? That won't be necessary, Marina replied calmly. I'm sure he's already on his way. Johnson was becoming increasingly irritated by this conversation that he didn't understand. Enough of this nonsense. Rodriguez, if that's your name, get out of the way or I'll arrest you too for obstruction. It was then that Rodriguez said something that made Johnson's blood run cold. Officer Johnson, are you sure you want to make threats to a federal detective in front of so many witnesses? The silence that followed was deafening. Johnson looked around and realized that there were at least 10 people filming with cell phones, in addition to the security cameras that he now realized were strategically positioned to capture the entire scene. Detective Federal? Davis stammered, his face rapidly paling. Marina finally straightened up, moving away from the car where Johnson had pushed her. For 15 years, she had watched corrupt cops make exactly these mistakes, underestimating their victims, ignoring protocols, assuming that their authority protected them from consequences. Officer Johnson, she said in a voice that now carried an authority that made even the people on the sidewalk stop talking, during the last 20 minutes, you have committed at least 8 federal civil rights violations, 3 documented assaults and 2 threats against a federal officer. Johnson stared at her as if she had started speaking in an alien language. What are you talking about? Marina looked at Rodriguez, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Detective Rodriguez, I think it's time to make the proper introductions. Rodriguez took a card out of his pocket and handed it to Johnson, who read it with wide eyes. Special Agent Marcus Rodriguez, FBI Civil Rights Crimes Division. The color completely disappeared from Johnson's face. Davis let out a low groan of despair. Marina held out her hand to Rodriguez. Special Agent Marina Restrepo, FBI Undercover Operations, Police Corruption Division. Johnson's world collapsed at that very moment. For 20 minutes, he had assaulted, insulted and threatened a federal FBI agent who was conducting an undercover operation. Every racist word, every aggressive touch, every threat had been meticulously documented by someone trained to build irrefutable federal cases. Davis dropped the handcuffs he was still holding, the sound of metal hitting asphalt echoing like a funeral bell for both their careers. Marina looked directly at the security cameras and then at the cell phones that were still filming. Agent Rodriguez, I believe we have enough evidence to proceed with the charges. The smile that formed on her face was not one of revenge, but of justice. For 15 years, she had dedicated herself to exposing exactly this kind of behavior. And now, Johnson had delivered into her hands a case so perfect that it would be used as an example in police academies for decades to come. As Johnson stood paralyzed, unable to process the magnitude of his fall, Marina knew that the next few minutes would reveal not only the end of his career, but the beginning of an investigation that would cleanse the city's entire police department of elements like him. Johnson remained paralyzed for exactly 15 seconds, slowly processing the words he had just heard. Special Agent Marina Restrepo. FBI. Covert Operations. Each word echoed in his mind like a professional death sentence. That can't be true, he stammered, his voice losing all the aggressive authority of the last 20 minutes. You're lying. This is some kind of prank. Marina calmly adjusted the phone in her hands, ensuring that the recording continued to capture every word. Officer Johnson, during our interaction this morning, you committed assault on a federal officer, civil rights violation under 18 U.S.C. Code 242, misconduct and documented racial discrimination. Davis let out an audible groan, his hands shaking as he tried to process the magnitude of the situation. Johnson, man, you broke up with us. You broke us. Marina signaled discreetly to Rodriguez, who pulled out his phone and made a quick call. Agent Rodriguez to Central. Code Alpha 7. Request immediate verification of credentials for Special Agent Marina Restrepo, Federal ID 4471. Rodriguez's phone rang a few seconds later. He answered, listened briefly and hung up. Confirmed. Special Agent Marina Restrepo, active for 15 years, specializing in undercover operations against police corruption. The color completely disappeared from Johnson's face. Davis let out a low curse and instinctively moved away from his partner, as if the proximity could contaminate him. Marina pulled a small digital recorder out of her pocket. She had documented everything as a backup, in addition to her phone and security cameras. Officer Johnson, every racial slur, every threat, every physical assault was accurately recorded for federal evidence. It was then that 3 identical black cars appeared simultaneously on the street, pulling up in coordinated formation. 6 men and women in suits exited the vehicles with the military precision characteristic of federal operations. Supervisory Agent James Morrison approached the group. Agent Restrepo, status of the operation? Marina maintained her professional posture, but allowed an almost imperceptible smile to appear. Operation Clean Mirror successfully executed, Supervisor. Suspects identified, evidence collected, witnesses present. Morrison looked at Johnson with a disdain reserved for despicable criminals. Officer Johnson, you are being arrested for violation of civil rights under federal authority, assault on a federal officer, and criminal conduct under color of authority. Johnson finally understood the full extent of his downfall. Operation Clean Mirror? You were investigating me. Marina nodded calmly. For 6 months, officer. Your department has been the target of a federal investigation due to systematic allegations of racial discrimination. You were specifically mentioned in 17 separate complaints in the last 2 years. Reality hit Johnson like a hammer. 17 complaints. 6 months of investigation. An entire federal operation built around exposing exactly his kind of behavior. Davis tried to walk away discreetly, but Morrison intercepted him. Officer Davis, you are also under investigation for aiding and abetting. Your options are to cooperate fully or face federal charges. Davis immediately raised his hands. I cooperate. I have recordings. I have messages. Johnson did it all the time and the captain always covered it up. Morrison signaled to 2 agents, who approached Johnson with federal handcuffs. Officer Johnson, you have the right to remain silent. As they read him his rights, Johnson looked directly at Marina one last time. Why didn't you say who you were? Why did you let it go this far? Marina faced him with the same serenity she had maintained throughout the ordeal. Because men like you have to reveal who they really are when they think there will be no consequences. Every racist word, every threat was your free and conscious choice. The handcuffs closed on Johnson's wrists with a final sound that echoed through the silent street. Onlookers began to applaud spontaneously, some shouting justice. And it was time. Morrison approached Marina. Excellent work, officer. This case is going to completely reshape anti-discrimination training protocols in academies nationally. Marina nodded, but her focus had already shifted to something bigger. Supervisor, based on what Davis mentioned about systematic cover-ups, I recommend expanding the investigation to the entire department command. As Johnson was placed in the back seat of the federal car, his last sight was Marina calmly talking to other agents, organizing the expansion of an investigation that would destroy not only his career, but potentially dozens of others. The operation he thought was a simple traffic stop had turned out to be a 6-month federal investigation culminating in his complete destruction. The woman he had insulted and assaulted for 20 minutes was exactly the person with the power to make sure he paid for every second of abuse. Marina's phone rang. It was the regional director. Agent Restrepo, congratulations. The Johnson case is already being used as an example in Washington. How many other cases do you think you can build? Marina smiled, looking at the security cameras that had captured everything. Supervisor, something tells me that Johnson was just the tip of the iceberg. And now, with Davis's forced cooperation and the evidence collected, we're going to clean up this department completely. That seemingly ordinary morning had become the catalyst for the biggest police corruption investigation the city had ever witnessed. And all because a racist man completely underestimated the wrong woman at the wrong time. 6 months later, Marina Restrepo was sitting in her new office on the 15th floor of the federal building, watching the city through the panoramic windows. Her promotion to regional supervisor of the Civil Rights Division had been unanimous, a recognition not only of her investigative skills, but of the national impact the Johnson case had generated. Operation Clean Mirror had become a mandatory case study in police academies across the country. The video of the approach, viewed more than 15 million times, was used as a perfect example of how prejudice and abuse of power can destroy entire careers in a matter of minutes. Johnson, on the other hand, was facing a very different reality. Convicted of violating federal civil rights, assaulting a federal agent and criminal conduct, he had been sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. His police pension had been revoked, his house mortgaged to pay the fines, and his wife had filed for divorce after the recordings went viral on social media. Davis, who cooperated fully with the investigation, received a 6-month suspension and mandatory community service. He was now conducting lectures on racial discrimination in public schools, an irony that did not go unnoticed by anyone who knew the story. The expanded investigation resulted in the arrest of 17 officers, including 2 captains and a commander who systematically covered up discriminatory behavior. The city's police department was placed under federal supervision for 2 years, with complete protocol reform and mandatory civil rights training. But perhaps the most significant transformation took place in the community itself. Johnson's 17 previous victims finally found justice through a class action lawsuit that resulted in substantial compensation. Many used the money to start businesses or fund their children's education, a victory that transcended any personal vendetta. Marina received hundreds of letters of thanks from people who felt inspired by her courage to keep her identity secret until the time was right. "You showed us that true strength comes from intelligence, not anger," wrote a young law student. "Your example changed my life." Detective Rodriguez was promoted to supervisory special agent and now led a national task force dedicated to investigating police corruption. "Marina taught us that sometimes the best weapon against injustice is strategic patience," he said in an interview for a documentary about the case. Supervisory Agent Morrison retired 6 months later, but not before implementing the Restrepo Protocol, a set of guidelines for undercover operations that became the national standard. "In my 15-year career, I have never seen an operation so perfectly executed," he commented at his farewell ceremony. Johnson tried to appeal his conviction 3 times, all of which were denied. His former colleagues avoided mentioning him, and his presence in prison was a constant reminder to other incarcerated officers that no badge offers protection against the consequences of racist and violent choices. The city where it all happened now boasts a plaque in honor of the victims of police discrimination, installed exactly on the corner where Marina was approached. The unveiling ceremony was attended by the mayor, who publicly apologized for the systematic discriminatory behavior that had been tolerated for decades. Marina never sought the limelight or public recognition. Her satisfaction came from something much deeper, knowing that her personal experience with discrimination had been transformed into protection for future victims. Every day in her new position meant an opportunity to transform injustice into systemic change. During an interview for a magazine specializing in law enforcement, Marina was asked what motivated her to keep her identity secret for so long. "Men like Johnson need to reveal who they really are when they think there are no consequences. My job was not just to punish him, but to document a pattern of behavior that could protect others." The final question of the interview was about revenge versus justice. Marina smiled, the same serene smile she had maintained throughout that fateful morning 6 months earlier. "Revenge is personal and temporary. Justice is systemic and permanent." Johnson lost 3 years of freedom, but tens of thousands of people are now protected from officers like him. That was always the real victory. 3 years have passed since that seemingly ordinary morning when Marina just wanted to buy a coffee before going to work. Johnson was released from federal prison last week, a man completely transformed, not by redemption, but by consequences. He now works as a night security guard in a parking lot, his dreams of authority and power replaced by the reality that actions have permanent consequences. Marina, on the other hand, has just been appointed regional director, overseeing civil rights operations in 5 states. Her office is full of thank you letters and photos with officers she helped train in the new protocols of conduct. The most powerful lesson in this whole story is not about revenge, but about how true justice is built, with patience, intelligence, and the courage to turn personal suffering into collective protection. Johnson tried to humiliate an immigrant and ended up becoming a national example of how prejudice destroys lives, especially those who practice it. If this story of intelligent resistance and systemic justice has touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't to destroy those who have wronged you, it's to build something so great that it makes their cruelty irrelevant, protecting thousands of other people who could suffer the same fate.